When we mention the word faithfulness, what is it that comes to mind for you? Maybe it's a person. And I want to tell you about someone who inspired me with faithfulness. I grew up watching my aunt. She lived out a quiet faithfulness in her home. She wasn't loud about her spirituality. She didn't lead a ministry. She didn't preach sermons, but she did pray. And she was a prayer warrior. She prayed every day. And this is the kind of perseverance that only comes with a deep-seated trust in God. You see, her simple, faithful lifestyle is what inspired me to be diligent in my pursuit of God. Her small, unseen acts of prayer created a legacy that I could follow. You see, what we're going to find today is that it's the small, everyday acts of faithfulness that are what leave the greatest impact, one that will last for generations to come. And that's what we see taking place in the fourth and final chapter of the book of Ruth. Today we're continuing in the fourth week of our series where we've been going through the book of Ruth, and our series is Finding God in the Ordinary. And this season invites us to rediscover God's presence in our everyday routines, to see that God's redemptive work isn't just found in the spectacular moments of our faith, but oftentimes in the subtle ones, in the quiet prayers, in the daily commutes, in the simple conversations. You see, throughout the book of Ruth, God doesn't speak audibly not one time, but his fingers are on every single page, reminding us that he is always at work, even in the mundane. And my hope is that through our journey of Ruth, it's been awakening a hunger in you, not just for more activity, not just for more achievement, but for more of God's presence. You see, last week we looked at chapter 3 and we saw the strong integrity of both Ruth and Boaz as they had their private encounter on the threshing floor. And we learn the importance of maintaining good character and waiting patiently on God to come through when he invites us to take active steps of faith. And this week, as we turn to chapter 4, we're going to be picking up the story there, and we're going to see three truths about faithfulness. Number one, that faithfulness may be costly. Number two, that faithfulness is always honored by God. And third and finally, that faithfulness has the potential to leave a lasting impact for generations to come. Our text, like I said, will be in the book of Ruth, chapter 4, starting at verse 1. So if you brought your Bibles, I encourage you to turn there with me as we read it together. If not, it'll be available on the screens beside me. Last week, we read about Ruth's private encounter with Boaz at the threshing floor. And there Boaz, he pledged to redeem Ruth as long as the nearer guardian, redeemer, chooses not to. And we are left as readers in anticipation for what is ahead. Will Boaz follow through on his pledge and see to it that Ruth is taken care of? Ruth's fate is held in Boaz's hands, and we're left waiting to see if he will come through on his promise. So let's pick up the text in verse 1 of chapter 4, where it says this. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so, but if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. I will redeem it," he said. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the guardian redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You, redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Now, in early times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to another. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself," and he removed his sandal. Boaz now takes center stage in chapter 4, and his integrity is proved as he immediately goes to the town gate in order to find Ruth's nearest guardian redeemer. We see that Boaz, his waiting isn't passive. The town gate was a common place where business was conducted. So there was a high likelihood he could find this other man there, but he would have had to be on an active search in order to seek him out. And the author's wording of this reminds us that God is truly the one who is behind Boaz's ability to find this man. And Boaz then invites this unnamed man to come over to what was most likely a small alcove along the wall away from the foot traffic so that they could talk business. And as they settled into family business, a negotiation starts to take place. And we, as the reader, are given now some new information. Because apparently, Naomi had some land that belonged to her dead husband that could be redeemed. And the most likely situation regarding this land is that Naomi's dead husband had probably sold his field before they moved to Moab in chapter 1. And while the land that was purchased by a third party no longer belonged to Naomi, according to customs and Jewish law, the land would still be under the rights of that family long term. So she could temporarily sell it to another party. And this land, that's what it meant, is that it was redeemable. And this is where Boaz begins his appeal to the nearest redeemer. While Naomi has no means to purchase that field, her near redeemer could. He could take ownership back. He could make additional money from that land. And this was oftentimes an obligation of the guardian redeemer to buy back the field. And what's more interesting is that as we understand this man, more of his character begins to come out. And this man most likely was aware of his obligation to buy back that land. Because in chapter 1, we saw that the whole town was stirred when Naomi came back into town. In other words, this guy knew Naomi had come. He knew it was his responsibility to buy back this land. However, he took no initiative to engage in that responsibility. He took no initiative to buy back that land on her behalf. He probably knew Naomi's story. He knew that she had no heirs who would continue her family line. So if he would to just let her die, he would inherit that land without having to take on any added social or moral responsibilities that were probably attached to it. You see, the way that this man acts paints a stark contrast between himself and Boaz in this story. This man was motivated solely by self-interest, while Boaz has been motivated by love and faithfulness. Boaz, he sees this man's selfish nature, and as he makes his appeal, at first the man consents because he knows it's his responsibility. He's been caught in his inactivity. And then we're left wondering, is Boaz going to lose Ruth to this nearer redeemer? But while there's a blip in the plans, it's only temporary. Boaz is crafty. He's ready with a response, and he publicly invites this man to fulfill the entirety of his duties as guardian redeemer, which includes marrying Ruth the Moabite. And after hearing this, the man is not willing to take that responsibility on because the associated risks that come with that position are too great for him to handle. So he decides to surrender his role as guardian redeemer over to Boaz so he can be the one to acquire the property and have the right to marry Ruth. See, the scene closes then with a nonverbal agreement of this man removing his sandal and giving it to Boaz. What we see in this passage is Boaz's strong character. It's evident by his willingness to live out the spirit of the law rather than doing the minimum that's required or what would only benefit himself. In other words, Boaz was faithful even when it could potentially cost him. See, as this whole situation is taking place and the procurement of land comes into the picture, we're left wondering, is Boaz's motivation now going to change? Is he going to try and swindle this man to get what he wants? But Boaz chooses faithfulness, even when he might lose all the possibility of a reward for his faith-filled actions. So what this text is revealing to us today is this, that faithfulness to God may be costly. And our culture is constantly looking towards self-interest rather than looking to the needs of others, rather than looking to be faithful. For example, our workplaces, our education system, they thrive on our ability to outperform our peers. It's all about how we can advance individually. The focus is how we get ahead rather than how we help others thrive. And oftentimes the idea of putting others first, it rarely comes into our minds, even in the minds of those who regularly attend church. But rather than live for our own self-interest, this text is encouraging us to be people who have motives for the good of other people. And Boaz lives this way. And in modeling this, he takes initiative to do what is right for the good of those whom God has placed in his path. This way of living, it stands out. Someone who chooses to honor their commitment, who cares for others when it doesn't bring them any benefit, this life stands out. This is what it looks like when faithfulness costs you. See, our faithfulness shouldn't exist only when it's to ourselves, but also when it could potentially cost us something. So I want to ask you this morning, how much of your life is motivated by self-interest? What aspect of your life revolves around your own achievements, your own success? And how might God be inviting you to care for those around you instead? Because there are people all around you that I believe are probably in need of a redeemer like Naomi and Ruth were. There might be people in your family. There might be people in your extended family. There might even be people within your own church or social circles. So what would it look like for you to take the initiative to come alongside and support people whom God has placed in your life, to help them get to a better place, to help restore them? Maybe it's physical, but also what if it was spiritual? You see, I believe that we need to be people who live like Boaz did, who initiate steps of faithfulness to help bring restoration to those around us. But if we want to be a people like this, I believe it begins first by growing in our knowledge of God's word. We have to see his love on display, see what he values so that we can start to impart it and live it out to others. And then we also need to have the strength and the courage to actually move forward in faith. So what would it look like to be a people who are working towards the good of those around us? Well, I believe an easy way to begin building up integrity and character like Boaz's is through practice of service. And the practice of service when there's no added benefit to yourself. So what would it look like to be generous to the people that you see on the street? What would it look like to anonymously give to that family member who's in need or struggling? What would it look like to simply volunteer at a local nonprofit to serve without getting anything in return? What would it look like to just simply buy a meal for the car behind you in the drive-thru one week? These simple acts of faithfulness towards others will start to build within us this idea that we are not catering to ourselves and ourselves alone. These practices help us grow towards modeling faithfulness in every situation, even if it might cost us something. See, Boaz is proven to be a man of godly character, a perfect redeemer for Ruth and Naomi. So let's continue reading as we see the hope-filled declarations from the witnesses that saw the exchange take place that day. Picking up the text in verse 9, it says this. Then announced to the elders and the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be just like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." Boaz announces to the elders with him and to all the people at the town gate that he is now the redeemer of Naomi and her sons, both their property as well as to be the one to continue their family line. And we see here a parallel to the negotiation that took place in the section we just read prior. And this repeat of what has taken place serves to emphasize the complete failure of that nearer guardian redeemer to live out his function. And then the elders are pleased, so pleased with Boaz's actions that they speak 3 blessings over him. And the first is this, a blessing that is full of hope, that Ruth would be fruitful and build up the house of Boaz. See, in the same way that Rachel and Leah did for Jacob. And this allusion to the Old Testament wives of Jacob is symbolic, since his 12 children became the 12 tribes of Israel, the foundation of God's people, the Israelites. And the second blessing is that they will become famous in Bethlehem. And this is a poetic parallel to Boaz's declaration, because he said he wanted to carry on the Mahlon, and they take it one step beyond. Go beyond just simply carrying his name, and would his name be made great in this nation. And then thirdly, the blessing that their family would be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. And this blessing is unique, since Judah and Tamar's story is not one of integrity like Ruth and Boaz's. But Tamar, like Ruth, was also a foreigner. And it was her determination that gave her entry into God's people through the bearing of a son. See, Perez was a blessing from God that came through Tamar's determination. In the same way, Ruth and Boaz's child will be a blessing from God that will continue the family line that stemmed from Ruth's determination. See, the blessing Boaz received, it reminds us, God honors those who are faithful to him. See, oftentimes we expect things to fall into our laps, and we rarely pursue things with determination and grit anymore. There are many areas in our lives where this could be true, but I think an easy example is within our marriage relationships. There are often times when we expect that our relationship is just going to thrive simply without putting any effort. We assume that love and understanding should just be a natural byproduct of getting married. But the result is that healthy relationships take consistent work. They require humility and sacrifice on the daily. In the same way, our spirituality isn't a passive area of our lives either. Our spiritual lives require the same intentionality that our relationships do. So we must constantly be in pursuit of godliness, which means rejecting the temptation of sin that may come our way. Pursuing godliness means living with an active surrender to God's word than our own. It requires us to be faithful, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. But living faithful to God means letting go of that sin that is weighing us down. And the author of Hebrews puts it so well in chapter 12, verse 1, when he says this: "Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." See, faithfulness to God at times requires us to have self-denial. And Boaz's faithfulness, it required sacrifice, it required obedience to God's desires more so than his own. And if we want to partner with God's redeeming work, we must remove that sin that can so easily hinder us. And we're encouraged to live this way because God sees those who are pursuing him actively, and he chooses to reward them. So let's be a people who are relentless in our pursuit of godly character, because God will reward those who will remain faithful to him in all circumstances. And when we talk about receiving rewards, that doesn't always mean we're going to receive earthly blessing. I'm not saying that if you pursue God with your whole heart, you will gain wealth, recognition, or status. But rather, the reward that is found is God's presence with you in every situation and the fullness of restoration in that relationship with your heavenly Father. There's no greater blessing than this. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is recorded in Matthew chapter 5. And as he speaks to the audience, he says that those who experience difficulty on his behalf, those are the ones who are blessed. And in verse 12, he reminds the people he is talking to rejoice and be glad no matter the situation, because great is your reward in heaven. So let's be a people who reject sinful behavior, who remain faithful no matter the cost, so that we can focus on how God is using us in partnership for the greater work of redemption that he is being a part of. See, God honors that kind of faithfulness. He may not reward it in this life, but he does promise good things will come for those who seek after him wholeheartedly. Boaz received a blessing from the elders surrounding him because they saw his faithfulness to live godly character even when it cost him something. But let's continue reading to see how God fulfills these blessings that are spoken over him, blessings that extend for generations to come. Picking up the text in verse 13, it says this: "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, 'Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age, for your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him.' Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The woman living there said, 'Naomi has a son,' and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David." This section is the epilogue of the book, and it was designed to be a perfect resolution to the death and the emptiness that afflicted Naomi in the opening of the book. At first, we saw Ruth experiencing 10 years of infertility when she was in Moab with her husband, but it's contrasted now by her ability to conceive almost immediately after she marries Boaz. And in chapter 1, Naomi's children died in Moab, but now a child is being born that will continue her family line in Bethlehem through Ruth and Boaz. And when she first arrived in Bethlehem, Naomi was found bitter and empty because of her grief and her affliction, but now she's experiencing restoration and fullness as she celebrates the joyous birth of her grandson. See, the story that was once marked by death and emptiness has now given way to life and fullness. Ruth is now receiving even more than the things that she once gave up. And this is a divine foreshadowing of another baby from this lineage that will eventually be born in Bethlehem, who will come to bring back the fullness of life to all those who are living in emptiness because of their sin. See, this moment doesn't just restore Naomi, it becomes a part of the story that leads to David and will ultimately lead to Jesus. See, God multiplies the faithfulness in this story far beyond even their lifetime. And in the same way, our acts of faithfulness have the ability to leave a lasting impact for generations to come. Our world conditions us oftentimes to depend on ourselves for our provision, for our success, and for our happiness. There are messages going around in our culture that says that you are the source of your happiness, that you make your own destiny. But what we get to witness in this passage is that God is ultimately in control. He is the one who is credited with Ruth's pregnancy leading toward renewed life in Naomi and the restoration of her family line. God's love towards those who are suffering is also on display to those who have remained faithful to him. And God still provides his love, protection, and care through the lives of those who embody his spirit. See, God provides a guardian redeemer for Naomi in the form of Boaz. In the same way, God often supplies guardian redeemers in the forms that we least expect. God can and does answer our prayers and petitions still today. So we should make choices not living and thinking for ourselves, but rather keeping God's values in mind. Because taking moral shortcuts, living for short-range pleasures or for our own benefit are not good ways to continue moving ahead in life. And Ruth and Boaz's obedience, they lead to a life and legacy that are so significant that she couldn't yet see all the results that were to take place. So we should live in faithfulness to God, knowing the significance of our life may extend beyond even our lifetime, and that the rewards will outweigh any of the sacrifices that we may have to make. See, this passage serves to instill in us hope today. That our showing up for others through faithful acts of love is how we partner with God's work of bringing blessing that will last far beyond our own lifetimes. This isn't a call to just remember what God has done in the past, but a call for us to actively partner with how God is at work today through the lives of those who possess his spirit. Boaz is an agent of God's divine work, and we are invited to do the same through the power of the Holy Spirit today. And in the book of Ruth, we see God's faithfulness as he cared for Ruth and Naomi and eventually carried their family line for generations to come. And as followers of Christ, we have the privilege of having our faithful God walking with us in every circumstance through the gift of the Holy Spirit. And our access to God through the Spirit empowers us to live faithfully as his vessels, sharing his love that has the potential to make a lasting impact for generations to come. What would it look like for our church right here in this part of Sacramento to embody this? Who is it in your life that needs your faithfulness to show up for them this week? Where might God be calling you to show his restorative love to those around you? Because I see a vision for what this can look like. And it means being present with those whom God has placed in our lives. It means being concerned about their concerns more so than with our own. It means prayerfully inviting God to give us guidance towards those whom we can be ministering to and be God's hands and feet towards. It means being faithful even when it might be costly, even when it might be inconvenient. It means having loving patience towards your kids, your family, your friends, your coworkers. This kind of faithfulness brings restoration that can make an impact that might just last for generations to come. See, we began this morning talking about how often about people that come to your mind in faithfulness, right? And I mentioned about my aunt. And what we saw is that the small everyday acts of faithfulness are what leave the greatest impact, one that could last for generations to come. So as we close this book of Ruth, we can look back and we can see God's quiet, constant work of redemption woven throughout every single chapter. Ruth and Naomi, they entered the story empty, grieving, uncertain, but God wasn't done yet. And through the faithfulness of that man, Boaz, God brought restoration to the family and began a legacy that would outlive them all. And that same God is at work today, rewriting stories of redemption. And I've seen it in my own family. I talked about my aunt, and I grew up watching her quietly praying in her household. I saw her faithfulness on display. She didn't preach those sermons. She didn't stand on stages. She just prayed daily and consistently, and specifically for her son. Because her son grew up in the church, but he walked away from it. My cousin ended up on the streets, and he was addicted to drugs, and she continued to pray faithfully every single day, multiple times a day for her son. And it took a whopping 7 years before anything began to change. 7 years of those quiet, still prayers, 7 years of heartbreak, 7 years of fear, 7 years of waiting, but 7 years of also choosing faithfulness even when the story felt hopeless. And then God started to work, and God reunited the relationship once again, and now he has regained his relationship with the Lord, and he is walking with the Lord again. God drew my cousin home. He from those drugs, he left the streets, he came back to God, and today he's living proof that God can do through faithfulness of one person who continues to believe that restoration and redemption is possible. My aunt wasn't trying to be impressive. She wasn't trying to make a name for herself. She was simply just being faithful in the little things, continuing to hold on to that hope. You see, it's the small, everyday acts of faithfulness that lead towards the greatest impact, one that can last for generations to come. God took that faithfulness, he wrote a story of redemption. Just like Ruth, just like Naomi, just like Boaz in this story, writing redemption. And behind all of their faithfulness stands a God who sees, who cares, and who redeems. See, the book of Ruth gives us a stunning picture of God's heart in its entirety, that he cares for the lowly, that he cares for the overlooked, that he cares for the widows and the foreigners. In other words, no one is excluded from his redeeming love. And this story doesn't just look backwards, it points us forwards. And the redemption of Ruth and Naomi points towards the greater redemption that is to come. And this small family story in Bethlehem becomes the doorway to another story that happens in Bethlehem when God sends his son into the world to redeem not just one family, but all of creation. Jesus is the greater redeemer that we should see in this story. And out of his sheer love, God sent his one and only son into our messy, broken world in order to restore us and bring us back to himself. There is no clearer picture of God's love and his care than this. And Jesus came for everyone, the rich and the poor, those who are put together and those whose lives are falling apart, those who are confident, those who are exhausted, the insider, the outsider. He came for you. And the redemption of Ruth and Naomi wasn't the end of God's story. It was just the beginning. And God isn't done in your story either. Jesus is the greater redeemer, turning emptiness into fullness, restoring what was lost, and he's doing it still today, even within this community. And that's why if you're following along with our Ruth journals that we've provided for you, the practice this week is to spend some time reflecting on the ways that God has been redeeming parts of your own life. Then write a simple 2-minute testimony in your journal, a short story of how you've seen God heal, restore, and redirect you. And next week, instead of me preaching in my normal sermon setting, the message is going to come from you. Because our service will flow through the stories of the people in this room, stories of God's work, story of God's redemption, story of God's faithfulness lived out in people's lives. And if speaking publicly makes you nervous, please hear me out. That's normal. Everyone feels that way, but remember, you're not performing. You're sharing with your family the words that God has placed on your heart. And it can bring hope into someone's life who truly needs it. And your honesty will encourage someone to continue moving their faith. And your story might just spark restoration for someone else who walks into the room that morning. So I encourage you to lean in, to reflect, and to write, and be prepared next week to come and share the story of redemption that God has been writing within you.